Hello there. Sorry about the delay. One of those things, doing it all manually as you said, I haven't reinstalled things yet. But yeah, I think that I should maybe not prepare streams in the morning and maybe do them sort of, a little more ahead of time, I think. So, this is my dilemma. I hate this stuff. I hate the fact that in order to talked about this yesterday, which was the this necessary thing that it shouldn't be necessary, but I don't know any other way. But in order to get people to sort of talk about the issues around sort of celebrity culture and influence and, online culture, business, all that sort of shit, right? In order to get people to pay attention to this stuff, you need to sort of link it to a story, like to make it interesting. This is what you got to do. You got to use a story to, get people interested in the theory, okay? In order to get people interested in the theory, you need to use something that will get their attention. In order to get their attention, you need to use maybe a story that might be somewhat exploitative of someone famous who's going through a hard time, someone who, can't defend themselves. And, I'm going to link this back. I'm just warming up, a bit rattled this morning, so give me a minute. There's always starts this way and then I warm up. But tech dramas again, fucking hell. Okay. So I think there's a reason I always stumble in streams when I'm trying to be more considered with my words, because obviously when you're dealing with something like mental illness or you're dealing with something where I feel someone is being exploited, whether they're rich or not, right? When I feel someone's being exploited, there's that balance between using them because it's newsworthy and because it will get your attention. This is the ethical dilemma we've got in general with content, right? Is that there's people behind this, okay? And, Yay is no exception to that. He's also somebody who's going through some stuff, has a mental illness, okay? So I'm just going to try and work through this beyond the surface level, because the thing that, again, I see this time and time again. I alluded to this last stream. My days go in streams. So next stream, even if it's 2 weeks from now, is tomorrow. Yesterday, last stream. That's how it works. It's time. That's how it works. No. In my last stream, I sort of alluded to this sort of dilemma that anyone faces, okay, which is, do we tell the truth as it is, warts and all, or do we, soften the edges, right, and mislead people and give people hope? Like when you're talking about one of the things that I did when I was studying, let me warm up. I'll talk about something else. While one of the things that really struck me in my child development training that I did was that there is this idea that somehow building self-esteem in children is a good thing. Obviously, it's a good thing, right? This is the dilemma. This is the dilemma that an ethical practitioner of anything has, which is that under capitalism, like I talked about yesterday, the incentive to lie, the incentive to mislead, the incentive to gaslight, the incentive to sort of, deceive is sort of baked in. And one of the things that really struck me and I wrote about this in my blog post about the sort of the Aboriginal kid in the stock photo on my blog. But I also thought about this in terms of young girls, which is one of the questions that were posed was whether to intervene or whether being bossy, right, with your friends represents a problem, Okay. Now, that can be looked at from 150 different ways. This was why, I think this was kind of what made me realise that I'm probably not good for academia, because a lot of it was trying to second guess what they wanted rather than actually just sort of sitting in all of the possibilities of the ideas and think it through. And, I need a more creative, less rigid structure in which to think and which to communicate. So that's part of the reason why. But one of the things that really struck me in that was, if you've got a little girl who's bossy, you've got, over here you've got your Ban Bossy campaign, which is a load of shit, right? It's not a solution, but at the same time, it is based in evidence in the United States, which is in the United States, you're on your own. There's nothing wrong with being bossy. If you're in the United States and a little girl, being bossy is a good thing. It's a leadership skill. You look after yourself. There's no one there to protect you. Okay, you're on your own. But in a different culture where you are part of something like, let's say kinship, right? Let's say Aboriginal kinship, family system, glossing over it. But this is the dilemma that we have, and this comes back to dilemmas and how we work through these things. And why content is such a big problem in terms of content, okay? Because people are taking these sort of pre-packaged simplistic answers and making declarations. And the problem with content is that's what sells. Slogans are what sell. Thought terminating cliches is what sells. This is what gets you interested. So there's, that celebrity factor, that's news story, the news cycle, the spectacle, the tweet, the hot take, all of those things. But at the end of the day, we're all human with vast histories and experiences. And this is why sort of going back and just sort of trying to track the story, track someone's story is really important to contextualize a lot of what they do. And I think that that's the dilemma that I've got with someone like Kanye West, which is that they've got a public profile, okay, which is very different from private life. Those things are different, believe it or not. We don't know who he is, okay, outside of what, is shared with the outside world, okay. But, the dilemma that you've got, across the board, like, what do you tell a little girl where, you've got the Ban Bossy campaign or something like that, but at the end of the day, there's a reality there, which is that you're going to have to learn to, you can't just go through life fighting all the time. Like, that's what I've done. I've gone through fighting every battle that there is to fight, constantly fighting for the right to be assertive, constantly fighting for, equal footing, constantly fighting mumpreneur, female entrepreneur, fucking, female business in heels, fucking lipstick feminism bullshit, and now it's, all of that sort of stuff. That's the reality that we live in, okay? I was told that we could do it all. I was lied to, okay? And there is something about learning to get along and learning when to shut up and learning to be, defer to others. That is it's not an ideal skill, but it's a necessary one for a woman to survive. I'm remembering when I was at a Women in IT event, and, I tend to not get invited back to these things because people ask me, I'll often be on a panel and then someone will ask me a question and I won't lie. I'll just give an honest answer. And I was at this thing and there was this young cybersecurity student and she look, I mean, I'm still used to, it's weird the idea that I've got seniority and people want my advice, but, I do, right? I've got all of that. And she asked me and she said, what do you need to do to survive as a woman in tech? And I said, don't have children. Right? If you want to succeed in this, don't have children. Okay? Learn, and I know that that's a horrible thing to say to somebody, but, no one's going to tell this kid the truth. And it's the same thing with like a 5-year-old girl who's, yeah, great. Are we projecting our ideals onto these kids and telling them they can be anything when, they can't be anything? Most kids can't. There's structural disadvantage. I mean, what do you tell a little Aboriginal girl who's like 6 years old, who's a bit bossy and, very intelligent, but you lie to her and say you can do anything and be anything and you need to like not, just walk away from your family, which is, very important to you? Or do you tell her the truth? This is going to be very, very difficult for you. And this is the thing where you go, okay, well, how do you pass that? And the answer to passing that is that it depends. Okay, it depends. It's case by case, individual to individual. There's lots of different factors that go into one little piece of behaviour, like say bossiness, despite the fact that that's also loaded. But I'm saying it was a deliberately loaded question. But it was also the kind of question that kind of triggered me into thinking that maybe, outside of academic, because they wanted an answer. And the answer was that there is no real answer. Okay, especially one that can be condensed into 1,500 words with somebody who doesn't actually physically exist in front of you, where there's so many different factors, right? It can be, depending on their temperament, their environment, who their parents are, what they've modelled, whether the bossiness is aggressive versus not aggressive, whether, it's affecting other people, whether it's causing harm. Is there a diagnosis? Well, is there other comorbid factors? Is there any trauma? Has there been any major changes? And they're like, yeah, they squeezed all that into a 1,500 word essay. And I just went, no, fuck it. I'm not doing this. I'm just going to talk about things. I'm just going to do things differently. But the same dilemma represents itself when you're talking about, even in tech, right? You're talking in tech, when you're doing truly human-centered design, right? When you're doing that kind of work, what you need to do is understand that each person is different. You can build personas in your mind, okay? You can build a caricature or a stereotype of a certain demographic, like using demographics and all that sort of stuff. You build a picture of someone in your mind, and we'll get to that in a moment. Like we'll get to the anti-Semitism stuff in a moment. And but there's just so many different factors that go into one particular behaviour. And one of them is the fact that this is being played out in public. The other seems to be that he is, he's gone rogue, just to be, polite. He doesn't appear to have positive support, but again, that's from the outside. Maybe he does. Okay. So if you don't know, so I'm opening with this. So again, I was talking about the dilemma. So the dilemma that you have is when you talk about somebody as a sort of celebrity, you walk a line between sort of using their story as a case study or an example, and further adding to that person's sort of dehumanization, exploitation. Now, I've had friends that were famous or public figures who have struggled with this stuff in the past. I have had someone who actually ended their life over this thing where they, didn't understand sort of that people were arguing with a straw man, sort of a version of them in their mind that was not them, the person. And when you exist in that public space as a public figure, not only do you have a responsibility, but you also have to work on that. And in order to survive fame, you're no longer a person in a sense. You're a product that people are just using as a target. So I'm talking about this issue I'm trying to bring this stuff to the surface because what I've seen a lot of people doing, especially, in the high profile space, who should know better, okay, is using this story as just a means of sort of pushing some other, whatever agenda they've got, okay, whether it's to get views or get likes or get clicks or, push some sort of, narrative about MAGA or push some, narrative about the left or push some narrative about whatever. Like everyone's in the business of commodifying, talked about that last stream, commodifying yay or whatever as whatever he's Kanye. I'm just going to call him Kanye. Fucking, I know technically that's dead naming, but I'm just saying it doesn't roll off the tongue, and I'm just, that's how people know. But I mean, you're seeing that split with the name change, right? You're seeing that occur, and there's symptoms that you can see in the behaviours, but we don't know. Okay, what we do know is we can reverse engineer some stuff. Okay, there's some things we can reverse engineer, and I can tell you a little bit about my experience in this sort of, post-divorce sort of grief, kind of messed up thing where you're not your best self, but also sort of comment on this broader problem of people sort of taking mental illness and diagnosis as a given. And in the current landscape, the thing is that lots of different things are true at once in this case, okay? Which is that, and that's why I think pushing for humanity and not just getting on the latest fucking bandwagon for the day, you fucking get your rocks off, get your dopamine, and then move on and, not really reflect on your contribution to any of it, okay? No one ever reflects on their contribution to it. At least, I try to. No one's perfect, but I try. But I want to acknowledge up front that I'm talking about Kanye West, yay, public figure, okay? We don't know the man. All we know is what, I find this gossip shit tawdry, to be honest with you. But it is an important case study because it does have some relevance to, how people are sort of nudged and radicalized and co-opted, and sort of all of these heuristics are used to sort of manipulate people politically. Now, so where do you begin with something like this? Where do you start the clock? Talked about this before. Where do we start the clock? So, Kanye West has a diagnosis of bipolar. That's what he said. Okay. He's also, again, I'm just going to go what's on public record. He's also said that he doesn't take his medication, that he manages. Okay. I don't know what his plan is. Again, you assume he's got resources, but when you actually know people with a lot of money and wealth, they actually tend to surround, especially when they're not well, tend to surround themselves with people who aren't like the best people. Because everyone's making money. Everyone's interests are in sort of affirming, whatever decision he makes. Okay. I would hope that he's surrounded by people that can contain some of this damage, and that when he is not, struggling, he has a plan in place so that, he can sort of lock away some of his major decisions. He can't make major decisions. Okay, excuse me. You can't make major decisions, within, I think, 24 hours of anaesthetic. You can't make these sorts of things, right? That's what a conservatorship generally does. But the problem with diagnosis is that also people just latch on to this bipolar thing and assuming that he's manic. It's like, well, okay, well, it could be, but you don't know that. He's received a diagnosis. He's acting erratically. But this is the thing where ethics, in terms of when you're talking, especially around with content creators, the smart people in the world, people who use people as tools, and everything is a transaction, and there's no people. Everything is just humans being, using people, things, everything, issues, politics as content in order to sell their shit. Okay, there's a call to action at the end, and that applies to politics as much as it does to product. But what we're seeing here is, people are sort of putting and again, this is why I open with this dilemma thing, which is that I mentioned it, talked about it. I'm hoping people will watch it. There's a call to action there. Become a patron. You get more quality mumbling like this. But I just want to bring that to the surface and acknowledge the hypocrisy of that. But also that there's a human there. But also that you're going on information that he has volunteered versus information that he hasn't volunteered. Okay, I'm not sure. Again, we're assuming that they're one and the same. Sometimes they're not. When you're dealing with someone who is an artist and you're dealing with a creative person, the persona sort of overtakes the person, and the person can sort of meld with the persona, and sometimes they don't even know the difference. Okay, that public-private divide is very difficult to navigate. Okay. And so I just want to acknowledge that and say, you've got an opinion on a character. It may as well be a character on a reality show, or something, or anything else, right? It's not the person. Same thing with Candace Owens. We can only judge someone like Candace Owens in terms of what they put out in public and what they choose to share in public, and on their conduct and their behaviour and what data we have there. I'm assuming, I'm struggling, but I'm assuming that she believes that she is doing the right thing. Most people are. Okay. most people who end up in like toxic relationships or end up in abusive relationships, both of them have stuff going on, okay, where together it's just a like explosive thing, you know, and I'll use some of my story for that as well. But again, also using people's personal stories in order to sell shit, okay, using others as tools for a story. Like I've done all of this stuff and I've made all of the mistakes, okay. And that's why I sort of will brush over some of the things, because out of respect for my children and out of respect for, you know, those involved, and knowing full well that this is my side of the story and not theirs, right? But I want to talk a little bit about how someone who is grieving, someone who is, you know, vulnerable, going through a divorce, also someone who is struggling to see their kids, okay, we're putting some context in place here, okay, how you're not your best self in those times, and how things like labels like bipolar particularly can be abused by those who don't have your best interests at heart, and, you know, just generally, right? So Kanye buying Parler is an interesting kind of, there's a lot of stuff going on there. Okay. First of all, you know, we know Twitter, Elon Musk is buying Twitter, right? And that's been a shit show of epic proportions. There's also this script going on of sort of Twitter, big tech, Twitter censorship. Now, Twitter has a censorship problem. Twitter has a suppression problem. I've talked about this at length. The lack of ethics with Twitter's design, the fact that they are designing for harm, and that's why I quit tech, because you know, what they were doing was so unethical and so sort of beyond the pale, and crossed the line into full sort of, you know, manipulation of people rather than sort of, you know, benevolent choice architecture, okay, which, excuse me, the choice is, the line is always fairly fine, right? But they crossed that line. So I've been pretty clear about how unethical Twitter is, right? But I'm trying to get people to fix Twitter, because Twitter is also fixing a lot of the problems that a lot of these guys exploit. And a lot of the reasons why a lot of sort of right-wingers are banned from Twitter is because they harass people, okay? They mob, okay? They show up in droves, and this is not just sort of the GOP. I bundle in the Democrats, wokes, Americans. They mob you until you, you know, go into, till you sort of admit defeat and delete your shit. That's one of the strategies. And also with all the astroturfing and bots, you know, like a pressure campaign works on Twitter, okay? Because your mentions just become so toxic and so unbearable that you switch off and you stop, or you either stop talking or you see what happens. More importantly, users see what happened to other users who talk about X, Y, Z, and they go, oh, fuck, I don't need that grief, okay? So there's that social comparison that goes on as well. But so Parler was interesting. Parler, I don't know if you were around. I register for all of the social networks because I like to reserve the username, but I don't really use them as such. But, you know, as an insurance policy, you know, just in case one explodes and becomes mainstream, you know, it's good to go and register. But, you know, like all of these things, people who are banned from Twitter, once you go and you see them all sort of gathering together, you start to see why they were banned. But what they're actually, you know, Parler is basically like a Twitter clone. That if you're not familiar with it, it's just basically a Twitter clone. And basically they claim to be sort of the free speech, like Twitter. Except their terms of service, you're not allowed to be anti-Christian, you're not allowed to be anti-Trump, you're not allowed to post porn. Twitter allows porn. You're not allowed to, so it's basically, oh, well, you know, we're anti-censorship of us, but we will harass and allow harassment of anyone who, and ban anyone who, says shit we don't like. So that's, first of all, Parler was not censorship free. It wasn't a free speech platform. But it was also where, again, a lot of evidence, compelling evidence that that Parler was the sort of breeding ground for a lot of what happened at the Capitol. Okay, so a lot of those people they got booted off Twitter because they were organising on Twitter, and they went on to Parler and they started organising. So a big part of Parler's history is that they were implicated in sort of the Capitol riot. Okay. So, I mean, the reason why people use Parler, again, they're never going to compete or leave Twitter. And you know why this is, which is that, again, this is something I've observed and studies back me up. And again, I've told you before about sort of showing certain things because, the copyright system is abused now. Okay, so anybody, if you do critique videos, you better have a lawyer and a relationship with YouTube. Otherwise, you run the risk of getting a copyright strike or whatever if they sort of catch wind. So if you play footage of their video or critique them in any way, that shows up in their YouTube admin, and they can give you a copyright strike and you lose your channel. So for me, I've done the calculations and just go, well, okay, if you want to find it, you can find it. And the same, just in general, that's just smart. Okay. This is the reality we live in, that the people who are claiming that they're being censored and they're being suppressed are the ones who are harassing people with frivolous strikes. They're the ones with all the money. They're the ones with all of the, the ones who spread lies. Okay. And I'm not excluding the US government's lie too. I'm just saying, in terms of non-state actors who lie and spread disinformation, they're the worst culprits. I've talked about that Fox ecosystem before. They just outright lie. They turn around and go, inflation's because the Fed printed money. No, it's not. It's not. That's just an outright lie. Okay, it's not even a version of the truth. It's actually just a lie. It's not true. It is debunked. And but people just go, I don't know how money works. That sounds about right. It sounds, I don't like the fact people are getting a check. It's like, no, corporations just jacked up their prices because they knew that they'd be able to hide behind this fucking pandemic. It's all documented. Look it up. So, it's and economic spending stimulates the economy and makes the economy more robust. If that's just again, this is Burkean economics that goes back from, it's been well and truly established as bunk. Okay, so side point. But they just, so what you need to understand about these censored conservatives, okay, again, is that they're borrowing. Okay, here's something that I will emphasize so that it makes sense when I get to the other stuff. Okay. A big part of the MO of a lot of these sort of right-wing culture warrior types, okay, is that they will take something that on the surface feels correct, feels true, okay? It works on your lizard brain. You start to see it everywhere, okay? They've sort of hacked your biases, okay, in a way, okay? Now, this is what, again, I'm not going to be that person that's compares goes straight to sort of Godwin's law Nazi Germany. It's that's a silly thing to do. But the techniques are very similar because it is the most extreme example, especially when you're talking about sort of anti-Semitism. It's hard to not look at that. But what they do is they take a heuristic, okay? So a heuristic is a pattern, a set of sort of rule of thumb, okay? We're very lazy people, okay? People are lazy in the brains. It takes a lot of energy to do what I do and go through and dig under the surface and, everyone thinks they're smarter than me. And everyone thinks they can do better, of course, because, they're lazy. But generally, our brains are pretty lazy. We like to conserve energy. And so what we do as a way of conserving energy is we build up patterns in our brain, okay? And we, create economy. So, something and a heuristic is basically a set of things that to be true with various sort of inputs, okay? So in the case of Nazi Germany, there was a heuristic, Jews are rich, Jews are doctors, Jews are lawyers, Jews are successful, Jews are in entertainment. There's a lot of Jews in entertainment. Okay, yes, cool, all right. And then you start to see that everywhere and you go, okay. Now, that's one of those heuristics, okay, that gets exploited. Now, obviously that might be true, okay, but it's more complicated than that. Okay. And this is where that gets heuristic. So a lot of these things, again, I've got to tread carefully here because, again, I'm just talking about stereotypes. I'm not saying these things are true. I'm saying this is how people, it's association. People, this is that sort of naivety about sort of, deprogramming people from sort of knee-jerk racism. You can't deprogram people from their experiences. Okay, you're not necessarily going to do that. You can educate them and tell them that maybe those experiences aren't terribly reliable. But, and this is what I've said about sort of, the gender critical sort of, radical feminist sort of, crew, which is that you're not going to get anywhere with anybody who has been, who's been abused by men in the past, who values female spaces, okay? For me, I'm a little less inclined to be, like needing sex single spaces because all of my bullies have been women, okay? It's like, it's easier for me to go, no, because I see no evidence of female solidarity, but other women do have that experience. But similarly, you can't necessarily deprogram people from their experiences without dealing with that trauma first and understanding that maybe that trauma that they have, yes, while there is a pattern, that, you need to acknowledge that that's a thing and then work outwards from there, okay? Because their experiences and their memories and their emotional experiences well outweigh any kind of, logical information that will be sort of, people will gather information that confirms, their worldview. That's just how it is. So, and this is where you got to kind of walk that line with, because basically the way that these guys work with Parler or with Twitter or any of this stuff, they take the left-wing stuff. This is how fascism works. Again, not making claims about any one big group being fascist because that's a silly thing either. I'm talking about fascistic behaviours. What it actually is as a phenomenon. Right? What fascism does is it borrows something that feels true. Okay, so in the case of something like fascism as a sort of force in itself, okay. Rather than just sort of more general far right or conservatives or whatever, right? These kinds of aggressive like propaganda campaigns. Okay. But let's just focus on fascism for a second. What fascism does is it takes your rage, okay? Your legitimate rage. In this case, we've come off the global pandemic where there was like, rules made up as they went along. Opportunity struck to sort of, implement some questionable policies. There's questions and trust. Again, this is an issue of trust. It's not just about, Pfizer and the vaccine. It's about decades and decades of sort of, I'll talk about that in a minute. There's histories of, medical professionals who exploit the vulnerable and experiment on the vulnerable and, market shit when they know that it's harmful in the case of, Oxy and all of those sorts of things, right? So there's a whole trust issue there. And this is why I think reverse engineering everything back to origin story and trying to track where it came from. And this is, again, I talked about this last stream, which is that, Marx has a lot of answers in the fact that that was another thing that he argued for, which was that, you can hypothesize so many different things and you can have this theory and this theory, but he said, no, just go back and look at what happened. Look at what the patterns were. Look at what the trends were. Okay. Now, much like look at what the heuristics were. See how these things all work, in tandem. If you have a thought, if you're thinking in terms of, trends and patterns and, data, but also understanding how people can have that hijacked and manipulated so they don't have a full set of data. Like I've been saying this for ages with like online stuff and digital, especially agencies, but it's like your data's wrong. You're lying. Like you. This is why they keep fucking up these campaigns, unless you're KFC, and KFC are fucking smashing it again. Holy shit! The left-handed chicken leg. God, I love that team. It's one of the only creative teams I'd kill to work on because they just own it and they own it beautifully. Anyway, side point. But one of the things that I've talked about with this whole data cult that's risen with MarTech and agencies is this over-reliance on data and analytics without a full understanding of the internet, without really digging deep on how people interact with the internet and how humans behave, and just sort of, some of that historical material stuff that goes with the internet, like what happened, where's, right now you've got agencies and celebrities and everyone PR, they're all fucking up and doubling down and being idiots because they don't have reliable data. They don't have reliable insight. And it's only people like me who just know the internet, like from DNA upwards, that go, you know what, there's stuff missing here, which is, like I said, this chilling effect where people have, over the course of, several years, not just in celebrity land, but, everyday people have gone, fucking hell. The second they say anything that is remotely, even just asking a question. I've seen friends who, not I've copped shit. I'm fairly reasonable and smart and, I get things wrong because I'm fucking human. But, I go through these things and people, but for the most part, people have been asking a question, curious, getting fucking shit on them, whether it's a friend, family, that's one aspect. But then on Twitter and those places, you've got bots, you've got trolls, then you've got your employer, then you've got the state mandating that you comply with certain things. Of course, they're going to build a certain heuristic that says, holy shit, the world is against me. Okay. Holy shit. This is my worldview. Worldviews have building blocks and they come from everyday experiences and everyday interactions, okay, that magnify certain sort of preconceived ideas that you may have. It works in reverse, okay? This is what I was talking about Nazi Germany. This is what there's been studies on, like the propaganda. Of course there has been like lots and lots of studies, but the thing is that most of the people that study it in good faith, and then it gets used by bad guys to recreate it. But how this works is that, it's the most effective propaganda has a sort of a magnifying effect, right? So what they'll do is they'll point something out, right? This is what some of this gender shit, right? And this is why this overabundance of sort of, and same thing with Nazis under every rock, same thing with all this stuff. Okay. It's easy to fall into this sort of thinking, right? Like the CIA did this once and then, then they do it. It's probably definitely them. It's always more complicated than that. But in fact, it probably usually is the CIA, but that's a whole other point. But in terms of, heuristics. So one of the sort of, main MOs is to make sure that the message that you get, okay, and this happened with sort of some of that gender critical stuff as well, which was, exposure to shitty men over years on the internet. Exposure to shitty men over the years, over the internet. Sexism, everyday sexism, everyday mansplaining, all day, every fucking day. And I said that to Paul. I was like, you just look at my fucking mentions on any given day. It's always just someone. It's always just, and these poor guys who didn't know don't realise that they're the 10th guy that day, and then I bark at them and they go, oh, I didn't mean it. Oh, well, sorry, but you're the 10th guy that day that's been a fuckwit. Okay, take the time to learn, fellas. It's 2022. The internet's 30 years old. You know what you're doing by now. Anyway, side point. But that's my heuristic. My heuristic is that every interaction with a man that starts a tweet with actually or is in my mentions is there to call me stupid, ugly, unfuckable, or somehow correct me on something that I actually have dedicated my entire life to, which is this. Okay, that I know that, because, some sausage in a fucking, funded by Southern Baptists gets to write books about the Marxist fucking takeover of education. I'm looking forward to that one. Somehow because he gets funded to write the book, somehow this is merit. This is America brain. He gets the money, therefore he's the one who deserves it, therefore he's the smartest. Not these powers, these structures exist so that if you are actually like critical thinking and actually intelligent and actually all of these things, there's a whole series of sort of nudges and incentives and various other powers, powerful forces that, will make it so that you're not allowed in it. That's what I was saying before about lying to some little brown kid in the desert who thinks that they're going to be a fucking, worldwide superstar. They might. But, you got to be honest with them. The odds aren't in their favour. Okay. And that's why it's like, okay, well, so that's not just, you just don't have enough merit in the form of a dick and a fucking checkbook. But anyway, moving on. So what heuristics do is, they basically, the most effective propaganda okay, is one that works on something that you already think is true. Okay, so like the mask thing is a good example, right? Where most of us were a little traumatized and shocked at everything like that was going on with the masks, and I think that a lot of us just were feeling a bit put out by it. But then, you know, those who exploit you, or you know, same thing with vaccines. Okay, you know, like people are automatically suspicious of pharma. There's things that are true about pharma, but there's things that are not always true about pharma. Like everything, it's fucking complicated. It depends. Okay, I don't trust pharma as far as I can throw them, but I still think there's, you know, they do good. I still think that you'd still get medicines if it was publicly owned because, like I said in the last stream, people like doing cool shit. They like inventing shit. Doesn't matter if there's profit in it or not. People who need to be paid to innovate are not very clever or interesting. There's people who just do it for the sake of doing it. Okay, take away profit incentive. There's people that'll do it anyway. And if anything, take away the profit incentive, better people rise up. Okay, because these fuckwits just go in and just, you know, loot the place and do unethical shit and don't value craftsmanship or discipline or, you know, that sort of stuff. So anyway, different thing. But in the case of someone like Kanye West, okay, and this is linked very much to Parler, in the sense that, you know, they don't care about censorship, okay? Much like Twitter with their algorithmic bans, okay, they base their, you know, signals, okay? Whether you're a bot, bad behaviour. Twitter bans are mostly done via algorithm, okay? Sometimes it's sort of a top-down, yes, you know, they're coming to get you, but most of the time it's just you trip up the algorithm and I've been saying for years, this is how it works, and people ignore it and they still just harass people and then act surprised and like they're a victim when, you know, when it happens. But at the same time, what I've noticed is part of the playbook of these guys, having had my shit used by them, having talked to them, having observed them now for years and years, okay, is that they will take something that seems true. They will take it from anyone, right? They've taken, you know, parts of my IP. You'll see a concept. You just put a concept out there, and then it will just sort of go through the chain, and they'll start repeating it, but in a way that is like not as intended. Like I've talked about the thought reform thing before, and that sort of stuff. But what they'll do is they'll take something that is a legitimate thing, a legitimate issue, like Twitter censorship. But they'll spin it in a way that benefits them, and they'll spin it in a way that recruits you into a worldview that is not like really, it's kind of the opposite of what you intended. Okay. And this is why I find Kanye to be interesting, but also him buying Parler, because this just feels like a big fucking long con from someone from Candace Owens. But again, we can only judge by their conduct and their behaviour and, you know, all of these things that we know in public. I'm sure she's a lovely person. I'm sure. But again, it's like, okay, well, you need to understand some history here, which is that, you know, the most effective propaganda is the thing that, you know, sort of magnifies what you feel true. Now, let's look at Kanye's history. So, again, like the purpose of a diagnosis is not to label someone and turn around and start saying that, you know, I mean, obviously it looks like going through something, going through mania. I will hesitate and go, okay, I hesitate to say he's mania because I can't. You can't determine that. No one can determine that, okay, because it could be part performance. Also, some of the stuff he says has a point. Not that stuff, but, you know, about what was the thing that he said? He said something about, can't remember, there was a class analysis thing that it's like, you know, he'd made a good point, but it was about capitalism, not about a group of people, right? But also his experience in terms of, you know, going through a divorce in the public eye, you know, having a dispute with his ex-wife whose, you know, family is quite powerful and, you know, who has their own media machine. And, you know, there's things there where, you know, we've seen the mainstream media, but we've seen corporate US media and their sort of blue check fucks and, you know, that sort of in-group deliberately do like these types of campaigns with kiwi farms. We saw this unfold so taking anything that they say as a given is something that, nobody should do. But I think that you've got to understand Kanye's history, I think, a little bit. Now let's go back and do some history. Okay. So he's grieving. Okay. Let's just do it. This is a thought experiment. Let's just, okay. I have to qualify this. I don't endorse anything he said, but I think that's a given. It's a given, okay? Like anyone who's going to quibble and say that was the case, you can look at this issue and zoom out and go, okay, I'm not being apologetic. I'm saying like this is what everybody should be trying to do every day with everything, because it's hard work, but you won't. So you'll rely on stereotypes and heuristics and all of that sort of stuff. So Kanye's mum, he's been grieving. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about me, not too much, because I really am just hesitant with this stuff. But in 2010, to 2009, 2010, with my previous marriage, I had, I was sort of big on Twitter for what, Twitter was at the time. I had 6,000 followers, something like that. So not huge, but I wasn't famous, but I, built myself quite a following. I was considered like influential, whatever the fuck that means. I was in the paper. Who cares? But, I did let it get to my head a little bit at the time, and it was fun, and it was just my water cooler, and I thought it was fun. But in 2009, my marriage kind of just fell apart. Okay, so there was a few things happening. My husband got injured at work. That the insurance company just stretched us out for a year. They just decided to just not pay him and let us fight for it. Now, by the time we kind of got the settlement, it just barely covered, the devastation that we'd had. 2010, so this is end on end. My son was premature. 2010, my grandmother, my grandmother, who was basically my mother. My mother was absent in my life. My grandmother raised me. She was suddenly diagnosed with a brain tumor, and she was diagnosed and died within 6 weeks. Okay. Not long after that, my marriage just, it was just one of those things. We married young. Yeah, the chat's not on today for a reason, because I'm talking about something serious. So what happened was, so basically, things happened. We married young. We had kids. We'd been together. It wasn't really, it was like one of those things, first marriage thing, right? But it just kind of fell off. But that also played out on early Twitter in 2010, 2011. Now, I'm a big mouth. I say things I regret, right? I'm not going to gloss over that. I'm not going to sort of go over old ground there, other than say that, nobody, I was first of all grieving, okay, the grief that I had felt. Like, even at the time, he said, he didn't think that I would recover from my grandmother dying, because it was just such a shock. We looked after her. I was her 24/7 carer for the 6 weeks until she died. It was very quick and it was very sudden, and it changed me, right, in a way. But because she was also like a devout Catholic, and it was just like a lot of stuff, a lot of spiritual stuff. Like, how could you still believe in a God when all of this, anyway, lots of stuff. But, sort of come out the other side. But I was grieving, okay. I was separating. I'm not going to go over this stuff out of respect for my children, but, it wasn't very good in the beginning, okay. So we did a thing where, because I was running the business and working full time and my ex-husband was still injured, we did a thing where it was like, okay, well, I'll move out. You have the kids full. It was an informal arrangement. Never do an informal arrangement because it will turn on you. But, it was you look after the kids and, full time, and I will live out of the house, work and have the kids, blah, blah, blah. But then I had a sort of, your rebound relationship and all that sort of stuff, and he got the shits on, and then he started to use sort of the children as a sort of, mechanism of control. Okay. Now, and I was sort of still grieving and not in my right mind. And this is what I'm saying about with Kanye. That's why I hesitate with this bipolar thing, because he has been diagnosed with bipolar, but so was I. I don't have bipolar disorder. I have emotional regulation issues, yes, with that, like I have ADHD, probably a bit spectrumy, but I'm not bipolar. I thought that I was. Like the doctor suggested I was at the time. I wasn't. I was grieving, and I was, not in my right mind. I was going through shit, and I was not seeing my kids, and I wasn't allowed to see my kids. And now this is something that's on record with Kanye West, which is that, again, I'm not blaming Kim for this stuff. Okay, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm saying this is where you need to be thinking. You need to be empathizing with all parties in this situation. Like in this sense, I also understand, with benefit of time and things healing, and that my ex-husband was hurting and lashing out and upset. He had a lot going on too. Okay, my kids, they were affected by it. Okay, it's like, can we just acknowledge the messiness without dehumanizing and seeing everything as a single act? No one is a single act. Nobody acts, like a 4-year-old who's being bossy. It's normal for a 4-year-old to be bossy, but there's lots of questions like, what's the circumstances? When did this happen? What's that? And this is why being sort of, cancelled and, censored for a tweet is so fucking ridiculous, because we were sold this whole idea that, we could build our own story and legacy and let it stand on its own. I have to leave out parts of my story now. I can't share these sorts of stories with anybody. I had to memory hole most of that stuff. I mean, some of it was for the best because it was a bit tawdry, but again, you got to keep some things for yourself. But at the same time, the fact that your data and your stories can be used as weapons against you, but also that you can't actually now. You don't have control over your own story. Like this small amount that I share with you, I'm aware of the impact, and I think that's a good thing. And I learned the hard way that, just because it's your story and just because, you're saying things doesn't mean it doesn't hurt or impact others. Okay. But at the same time, the fact that that people are seeing the consequences of living the life that, they were promised and then taken away. Like Tech promised, they asked us what we were doing and we answered them, and then they weaponized that. Think about that. Just again, step 2, step 3. Look at history, think it through. The next step, look at Kanye. His mother, okay. Yeah, I don't need to. Okay, so Matt said hugs. I don't need hugs. I'm fine. I've dealt with all this stuff. But I'm just saying, I'm saying in general, right? I use myself as a skeleton and scaffolding so that others can process their own stuff. I don't share anything I haven't already dealt with. It's all fine. But thank you. I tend to not bleed all over people, but I have some wisdom and experience. But also, there's this whole content factory where they will use your stories to sell the shit. And it's like, well, no, like, I'm not going to and somehow you are only allowed to have an opinion on these experiences if you betray the trust, or like me, I've learned the hard way that oversharing is bad for you. Okay. In terms of your, your offline life. But now there's this whole weird thing where your story is your currency, and somehow people think that because you don't share these stories that somehow you haven't got those experiences. And it's like, well, no, I've learned the hard way that some things you got to be conscious of who you're hurting and sharing. And this is, again, content creators using Kanye, all that stuff. The mindset that people are, that these things are, again, just thinking it through. Just going to the next level. That's all I'm asking. But with Kanye, like I said, his mum, right? Her death. She died in surgery. Okay. No, sorry. No, she didn't die in surgery. She died as a result of complications in surgery from a heart condition. Okay. A doctor who didn't screen her for a heart condition. She was discharged, and I think it was I didn't look, was it embolism or some shit, right? Heart attack. And there was a malpractice insurance. There was a malpractice suit. There was an inquiry, and subsequently in 2000, this was in 2008. In 2009, Arnold Schwarzenegger passed Donda's Law. Okay, which is weird that this is so America, by the way, with like medicine. I love how everyone's like, oh yeah, no problem with gender affirming care, but except for all of this history where, medical malpractice happens and we need to pass a law to make sure it doesn't happen, which was Donda's Law, which makes it mandatory for cosmetic surgeons to screen for pre-existing risks. That has to be a law. It's not just medical. See, it's like, yeah, okay. Sure, there's no problem then. But at this time, we're right. This time it's fine. It's like, no, we're based on, these things are not hate. They're based on history. It's like anybody sensible hesitates, okay, with this stuff because of the history. Same thing with the mask. Anyone with the vax. I'm not saying that they didn't go loopy because that was used by those fucks like Candace Owens to sell shit. But they use something that is true and they exploit it and they make it bigger and they make it bigger and they make you scapegoat, whether it's the left, whatever the fuck that means, whether it is Jewish people, whether it is people of colour, whether it is the trans, whether it is LGBT, whether it's kids, whether it's teachers, which is another thing that they're doing, manufacturing your, disdain for a poorly funded, poorly resourced, low pay profession as, anyway, it's a whole other thing, right? Teachers are the good teachers are leaving because they're not remunerated enough. It's not because they're in a cult. It's because fucking the only people that'll work there are idiots who can't get jobs elsewhere. Okay? Jesus. But anyway, so, what was I saying? I've sort of meandered today. Oh yeah, but if his mum died, medical negligence, okay? He had to go to court. He had law passed, okay? Cosmetic surgeon. Now, look at it heuristically. Start to see a picture form here, okay? Someone who in the entertainment industry, okay? Record labels. Exploitative, okay? They're basically, when you sign with a record label, you basically get a Scientology contract, a fucking billion-year contract, okay? Same difference. Now, all of his interactions with, say, the business end, okay? Entertainment, fashion. Now, I'm not saying his heuristic isn't broken or wrong. I'm saying he's got a heuristic that makes sense if you reverse engineer who he's hanging out with, what happened, okay? Let's paint this scene. His mum. Okay, now I know the surgeon was African-American. I'm just saying that, again, I'm not saying there's a delusional thinking there that goes with it, which is doctor, okay, by association, okay? We've all got that heuristic, okay? Now, doctors, lawyers, accountants, entertainment industry. Now, nobody is saying that it's just, I'm saying, I'm okay, this is where it gets, I think it's clear what I'm trying to say here, which is, that for many people, an association memory, even for a lot of Jewish people, is doctor. Like when you think of Indian, you think of like engineers, okay? It's just how it is, okay? Fucking hell. Calm down. I don't mean it. But there's a leap there to, like I'm saying, there's something broken in his heuristic that associates all these things, but he forms a pattern and that becomes amplified and reinforced by people like Candace. So he sees, his interactions, okay, his everyday interactions on a small scale every single day tell him, and again, because he's selecting for it, because he already sort of partially feels that it's true, okay, again, I'm not saying that's a good thing. We're just trying to unpack this. This is why it gets delicate, okay. He hasn't had good experiences or good interactions and he's sort of, displaced that, not onto capitalism or not onto the structures because he's rich, okay? He displaces it onto, this is where fascism sort of co-ops and sort of turns sideways. You see how it's like, well, yeah, see what I'm saying? Probably not because I'm rambling. I have to go in 20 minutes, so get to your point. But, he's on record saying he's been diagnosed with bipolar but he's unmedicated, but at the same time, we've seen it enough now to see people where, media matters and, all of those fucking Democrat cunts, and you got midterms coming up and all that stuff. And so discrediting someone like him, and it's not outside of the realm of possibility that this is hit piece, especially when you've got a powerful ex-wife. And again, I'm not saying that's what she's doing. I'm saying I personally have lived, well, not this experience, but, a version of this experience where I was not in my right mind. I was gaslit. I was diagnosed with something that, and then I accepted that I had it because I wanted, all of that sort of stuff. And I just kind of went with it. I lost my shit. I moved across the country because I realized that, I needed to get away from everything. I lost my fucking mind, landed in another relationship that exploited that and made me feel like shit. And now I'm in a good thing. And like, funnily enough, my bipolar went away when I was in a good relationship. Who knew? But, but there's people that will sort of exploit you and manipulate you and, get you to do what they want when you are in a vulnerable position. And that's backed by statistics as well. Okay. So bipolar people, depending on the study that you look at, right? There's a lot of studies. I got some stuff here. Where are we? Like, what's some stats here? Where are we? Where's bipolar? Do I have any? No. Okay, I didn't write it down. But that's okay. Because, right, statistics, anywhere between like twice as likely to be victims of abuse to something like hundreds of times more likely, depending on your resources, depending on, whether you're medicated, unmedicated, whether you are compliant, non-compliant. I don't like the word compliant, non-compliant. I just mean them clinically speaking, that, that means you accept the diagnosis and engage in treatment. You could be non-compliant because you reject the diagnosis and not be bipolar, and that's a problem with this for-profit system is that and also like I said, abusive exes who will slap you with these labels in order to exert control. This is messy, but also with my own experience, which was that when my ex did this, there was a whole bunch of people on Twitter who joined the party because they didn't like me because I was a mouthy bitch and I said what I liked, but they wanted to kind of tear me down as well. There was a component of that where they just didn't like me because I was in the paper. They didn't like me because I had influence. They didn't like me because people were noticing me, okay, and they weren't being noticed. So they thought, well, let's tear this person down, dehumanize her, tear her to shreds. I knew that it wasn't about me. It was about them and like what I represented to them. But at the same time, it was still about me at the time. Okay. I went viral and I did an AVO out on people. And I've gone through some of this stuff. My ex used me going viral as a psychological weapon, as a sign that I was bipolar. I was like, no, it was a fucking joke. It was a test of a thing that proved to be true theoretically, which is that you just create the right human interest story and you can be used for a day on Twitter because journalists were just, parroting shit and just printing it, and they just create the story for you out of their own self-interest. That was the model that I, exposed very early on and I coached in for many years, okay, as a marketer until it became sort of too cynical. That's what I find funny is that people go, oh yeah, it's like, no, I did this and I know how it works. I know how the sausage is made and I know the interest and I know the money in it. I know exactly how to execute these campaigns, and it was fun for a while and now it's just evil. We had a blind spot, So that's just the whole structure of the system now is lazy journalists who are paid, way too much money. They are wastes of space and their whole job is to run hit pieces and defame people and cancel people and create drama and spectacle with no regard for the consequences of their actions. And Twitter and Facebook are owned by the same fucking owners who just use that to manipulate the whole fucking system. Okay. Thank you, Matt. Matt said, got to go, but take care. Good to see you streaming. Yeah, so I'm going to start doing it. I'm easing back in. I'm hoping to do it every day. Again, I'm a bit waffly at the moment, but I'm going to start doing sort of 30 minutes every day. But I'm just at the moment just going to do twice a week and then just ease in, But anyway, so what was I going to say? No, but these things are. Just because it's a famous person and he has $1 billion, okay, and shrinking, doesn't mean that he's not grieving, doesn't mean that he's not vulnerable, doesn't mean that he doesn't have heuristics that can be hijacked, okay. The thing that you need to know is that Candace Owens' husband actually owns Parler, okay. This just strikes me as a fucking, this actually just pisses me off, okay. She's somebody who is a clearly opportunistic person. She does not have his interests at heart. And the red flags have been there with this friendship, okay, for some time. Okay. It's obvious, okay, what's happened here. Okay. But also you got to be more forgiving of Kanye. Do you know why? Because in this storm, remember, there's his kids. Whatever he's done, yes, okay, I'm not again, there's this, some people can just go, you know what, I don't care about that. That's for the courts to figure out. That's for them to figure out. This is, I just don't like this court of public opinion thing. It's like, well, okay, no, we're focused on Kanye right now. Okay, we're focused on the person who is on the back foot in terms of the story. Okay, now, obviously he's been conducting himself in ways that are questionable, but at the same time, having been someone who had an ex that would, do everything verbally, and then deny that he said things, and he'd get me to the point where he'd just, get me to explode and get me to burst and then document that I'd exploded. But because I always decided to be sort of that, not drag things into the gutter, because I'd learnt that early on in the internet. I'd learnt that stuff, to not just drag everything, online, because, that hurts people. So I decided to keep it sort of as classy as possible, limited it to my Facebook. But, like to this day, I hear his ex-wife still slags me off on Facebook in front of my kids. And I go, no. Okay. But that's just how it is. Okay. But having been on the receiving end of that, where someone will just goad you and poke you, and then when you explode, they're ready to, come at you with a ton of bricks. Again, you don't know what's happening behind the scenes. You don't know what the fuck's going on behind the scenes. I'm just trying to present maybe a more, more empathetic point of view to everybody. Okay. Which is, when was it? There was that spat that they had, sort of early in the separation, when Kardashian was putting her daughter on social media, and he arced up about it, right? So there was this whole thing during the separation where they were already trying to co-parent public. It was a very public divorce. They'd only just had a surrogate fourth child, right? That obviously had, all the fertility problems, fucking all this stuff, right? The reality of, sort of the idea of a woman like Kim Kardashian versus the reality of being married to someone like Kim Kardashian. Again, it's not her fault. I'm saying that's just the dynamic again. Just, based on sort of trends and what happens. Just using them as an example. When there's a difference in co-parenting, okay, that can blow up, and to blow up so publicly. But also you've got a parent like Kris Jenner, okay. Now, I've been on the receiving end. I didn't have family, right? I had my, the problem with, I think when you've been through a divorce, you understand that the person who is willing to lie first has the advantage. The incumbent has the advantage. So, me letting him have full-time care of the kids automatically, in good faith, automatically made people go, well, what's wrong with you as a mother? That was a thing. They're heuristic. All mothers have their children. I was like, no, we made a thing based on, I was helping, and that was the deal, and it was informal, and okay. And then, okay, all right. And then it would be, that was funny, dating, well, why don't you have your kids? Why don't you have yours? Shut the fuck up. That. But, it was like that whole thing. But then, there's all that people that's like people who like gossip and the spectacle, and they wanted to take me down and go, oh, well, she must have done something. She must have done something if he has the kids. Must have done something wrong. Oh, shit. Oh, my God, she Instagrammed a glass of champagne at New Year's. Fucking hell. Gee. And then I would get angry and rant a bit too much, overshare too much online. Again, I own that mistake and write sort of things. And, that's immaturity. And I've, learned from that. But, the person who is willing to sort of, bullshit or rewrite history or believe it's true and believe it, even if it's not true, they're working on their fucking, whatever the fuck reality he's living in. It's true for him, whatever, okay? But that then sort of co-opts my family because my family's quite fractured. So, you know, I've always been sort of the odd one out in my family as well, where they think I think I'm better than them, that kind of dynamic, right? Because I went to university and I, you know, all that sort of stuff, right? So they're always like, "You, what do you think? You're better than this?" So the second that I get divorced and there's a story out there that I did the right, you know, certain things or whatever, which I didn't do. Oh, well, that sounds like her. Yeah, well, she thinks she's better than us. She would definitely do. It's like, okay, well, that's their heuristic. Okay, that's what they think of me. Okay, that's fine. I was more, you know, like a lot of that was disappointment that people just believed that about me when I was like, I just never bothered to defend myself because there's no point. Because once you get into this sort of, oh, she's like done something and the gossip mill and all those sorts, the second you try to defend yourself, you just within that paradigm. I remember on Twitter, like this was what, 2011, and I just turned around and just, they were going at me and I just was, you know, it escalated to the point where there was like, you know, stalker. And then when I went viral and all that stuff, it just got messy. And again, this is from my point of view. There might be other views. But, you know, what happened there was that, you know, I started to sort of defend myself, but every time I tried to defend myself, it would just become more and more evidence that they would use against me that I was the person that they decided that I already was. Like when I just would tell someone to fuck off, right? This is the problem with Twitter. You can't even just say fuck off anymore. You can't do anything because they've already decided what you are based on like all of these signals, okay? Based on political interests and economic interests, right? Or who you're friends with and all that stuff. Twitter is basically just a Twitter mob in the form of an AI. It's just basically, you know, your worst fucking ex-wife as an AI. But what happened was, you know, like, and there came a point where I just, you know, there was a thing where it was like, I think it was like a mental health ball or are you okay? It was something about mental health where all these people were going on about mental health. And I turned around and I said, fuck you all. You talk about mental health, but you continually dogpile people who are like obviously going through a tough time. And then they were all like, oh, I'm depressed. And it's like, oh, yeah, how dare she say something that's true? Anyway, all that stuff. That was in the middle of Coriander Gate too. So things were tense. And that's a previous stream. Look that up. But what happened was that then it just got into me going, no, you're hypocrites. They're talking about depression and like, you know, but you're going after someone who's like blah, blah, blah. Anyway. And then I just told someone to fuck off. And then he called me schizophrenic publicly. And that was somebody that I was associated with. And that was quite defamatory because it was not true. And I actually, you know, took quite a lot of exception to that. And, you know, I considered like actually taking action, but the law wasn't there at the time. It wasn't there. Near the resources. But my point being that you can see this happen on a microcosmic level. Just, I mean, I can understand why you got to have that plausible sort of. There's that reasonable doubt there with me, and the fact that, you know, given his circumstances, given the fact that he, you know, his mother was killed by a doctor, and he's working in the entertainment industry. And again, I'm not saying the Jews run the media. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's a common trope. It's a stereotype. And if you've got, synapses that are kind of misfiring, you're going to misfire in the wrong direction, especially when someone like Candace Owens is your only person defending you when your ex-wife is calling you an abuser publicly. Now, there's a trauma bond there. Okay. Now, the interesting friendship between Candace Owens and Kanye West. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning Candace Owens is because Candace Owens' husband is the CEO of Parler. Okay. Parler is a Twitter, if you're new, Parler is a Twitter clone that was largely a joke where all the fucking people banned from Twitter joined and basically just reposted their tweets and basically organised the insurrection. And, you know, then they want Twitter. Thing is, they're never going to fuck off to an alternative platform. They want Twitter. Do you know why? Because a big part of their MO is bullying people. And the people who are being bullied are people who wouldn't be on Parler, they'd be on Twitter. So they just want to be back on Twitter. So it's all just a big load of shit anyway. They just like bullying trans people. They like saying what they want. They like spreading whatever bullshit conspiracies they want. They like organising fucking insurrections and fucking all this shit and radicalising people and lying to people like Kanye West. And then being there to love bomb anybody who asks questions of, that are generally sort of left-wing business, okay? So left-wing always disagree, but they're right there to scoop you up whenever you fucking got a question. And then some fucking dickhead on Twitter goes, you're anti-Semite. You're transphobe. That shit, okay? That's the stuff that pushes people right, because there's a fucking love bomb waiting at the end. Again, not blaming Kim Kardashian. I'm saying these things are related to these things and they lead to these things. And you can see what happened. This is what Marx said. By looking at events, what happened, what the patterns are, what are the similarities, okay? These are the common threads, okay? Fuck your ideology. Fuck your fucking ideas and things. What happened will give you all the information that you need. That's it. What happened with Kanye? A man who was grieving. His mother was, I imagine that, suing over medical shit, okay, would be quite re-traumatizing, especially when you're up against lots of doctors and lawyers. They may have been Jewish. I don't know if they were, but I'm saying they, his team and all those things. But again, they take something that's a tiny bit true, okay, like, I don't know, maybe there's a conflict of interest in a doctor in a for-profit healthcare system, believing in a disorder that results in a lifetime of surgeries, for example. Okay? There's a conflict there. There's a real conflict. And then idiots on Twitter go, no, and corporate interests on Twitter go, sick their bots on you and go, well, no, fucking TERF, transphobe, shut the fuck up, fucking bigot. And then you go, well, fuck them. Because you don't know what the left is. You don't go to meetings. You don't know what the fuck is going on. So you go, oh, look, Candace Owens. Oh, look. And one thing I have noticed that they do, there's the right-wingers, is that they actually show up when you're vulnerable and they give you money and they promise you the world, okay? They offer to help you exactly where you need help. They offer you a business deal with, Elon Musk buying Twitter and Kanye not in his right mind. Again, I'm not going to, he may not be manic. He may just be vulnerable. He may just be grieving. Turns out I was like, again, no one's in that position because he's not, I would say probably, but again, this is just critical thinking, okay? This is just what the difference between being curious and appointing yourself sort of, and being involved in content and gossip, okay? Remembering that there's a human there who's got a story and and if you actually took a moment to understand the history, and this is one of the things I think I really liked about doing social work when I was younger. I think it's just an automatic thing for me, is to get the history, of everything and what leads to this event. Like, ironically, a doctor should have done that to his mum and gotten her history before, performing surgery. It's a good thing to do, which is to understand what led up to this point, where you start the clock, what the key events are, who the key actors are, what the science is. It's not just science versus this versus that. It's like history plus science plus what's possible plus this plus this. Twitter bots, down the fucking line. Fox News, down the fucking line. They're trying to sell you things. But also you need to work with all of these things, science plus this, plus this, plus this, with a broad assumption that capitalism is there to harvest everything that you have from you and take it for the benefit of someone else. Asking what that call to action is, okay? That's the baseline assumption that you need to have when you're thinking. And you go, okay, what's true? The difference between being in a conspiracy land, okay, like fucking, this anti-vax, anti-mask, whatever, is to not make this shit your identity, but to actually go, no, there's a process to follow. What's the whole picture here? What is the history? What is the evidence, okay? Now, there's going to be people that do hit pieces and want something from you, whether it's, not to see your kids or, to silence your opinion or silence dissent or, get you to vote a certain way. I find it very worrying that the Republicans are being modelled to win the House in the US. So it looks like, the plan is working, which is unfortunate. But the whole MO of these sort of GOP actors is to, first of all, say something that is true and magnify it, amplify it, right? This libs of TikTok is that they work in heuristic the whole time, right? But you got to ask what the policy ask is. Is it what? School choice? Which means segregation? Is it defunding teachers? Is it defunding universities? Because this is actually a symptom of not having funding, not a symptom of too much, okay? Is it like letting this new McCarthyism run rampant and is it letting, one percenters just do whatever the fuck they want, like put inflation up by 8% and blame the pandemic when it's actually documented that they've said to their shareholders and in their annual reports that they're just going to up the prices. Someone has to make a decision to up the prices. You know that. It's not just people just go, again, you have to buy the lie of the invisible hand for the whole fucking house of cards to work. But the invisible hand isn't a thing if it's manipulated, okay? If even your basic microeconomics, you've got your supply and your demand, but then you've got things like that, the things that affect your sort of, affect demand side demand, right? Which is, advertising, all sorts of things, right? So I'm not going to go into fucking microeconomics, but I'm just saying, right? You've got to think about what assumptions and what heuristics and what basic assumptions you make about anything, okay? And try to understand and reverse engineer that. That's what this sort of, bias training is. It's really just about reflecting on that. Okay, so when you think of an engineer, do you think of a man or a woman? If you think of a man, then maybe you should challenge that a little bit more and try to experience more and learn more and be exposed to things that don't just affirm that stereotype. That's all it is. That's all it is. It's not, But, these guys who are threatened by all of this stuff, they use these things. They use your class rage, which is what fascism does. They use your, what would be revolutionary energy and organising in the union and, looking after your fellow man, and they weaponize it into, recruiting into sort of radical shit, whether it be, evangelical church shit or, the capital riots or voting GOP or, they nudge you into that sort of, or in this, this cultural Marxist conspiracy theory, which is that's literally Bolshevism, cultural Bolshevism from the Nazis. It's the exact same shit, okay? And it was and the fact that it's just gone mask off with this anti-Semitism, right, is telling. But what they will do is, they will use what your little heuristic is. Like even for me, I'm like, yeah, I know a lot of all the people I know in entertainment who are celebrities, bar a handful, are Jewish. Of course, that's like, yeah, okay, that heuristic's there. I know that it's not accurate. I know that that's just my experience, but a lot of people will extrapolate that out, especially if they're receiving information or they've been traumatized or hurt by the legal system where, they've got a handful of Jewish lawyers or they've got we have that problem, I think, with, Aboriginal people here. Like I work with Aboriginal people, it's not a problem, but there's a lot of sort of middle class people who were mercilessly bullied by Aboriginal kids, and we know why, and we know that there's a lot of systemic problems, but their heuristic is their lizard brain's going to fly off because that was their experience as a child. It's not the kid's fault. It was no one's fault. It's not, generalized. It's just their experience. Okay. And this is why trauma-informed stuff is really good, because you've got to understand where these things come from. And they take hold, quite a I don't want subconscious, but, you learn these things and they're very deeply ingrained. And again, just because you say that is hardwired and it's something that you need to be aware of, doesn't mean it's okay. It doesn't mean that it's acceptable. But sometimes, when you are in an unwell state, you're not your best self. There was a point where when I was called schizophrenic, I was calling everyone, well, I still do. What am I talking about? I was calling everyone fuckwits and cunts. Still do. I'm just more selective. But, no, but I was sharing a lot about my kids and stuff that should have been private, my grief. And because, in the early days, pre-2010 internet, the internet was sort of your safe space where you could, I've joked about this before, it was where I kept my secrets because no one was on it. But then everyone sort of ended up online and it became a place where you were broadcasting all of your dirty laundry, publicly. And again, people are really only coming through that cycle because I was on earlier, 10 years earlier than everyone else. So I learned earlier, thankfully. If I'd been going through this now, it would be worse because my cancellations and humiliations would have been a lot I'm glad they cut me off at the knees in 2019 because you haven't been able to grow my follower count. But because I abandoned my Twitter account as a result of all of this in 2012 after I fucked off to the other side of the country for a man. I'm an idiot. It's the worst mistake and regret I ever made. Again, I understand why. I can tell people why. That's not for the stream. I wasn't in my right mind. I wasn't bipolar. It was grief and, probably dissociation and just, a situation where, it felt untenable at the time and I saw it out and I took it. I regret it, but I did that and you can't go back. But, at the same time, it's like things, you can't undo these things, but you can't really judge somebody like this. But, the fact that this guy, I just feel like this is just a big fucking group. I just feel like I felt really bad for him with this. Again, I'm not saying I endorse the remarks. I'm saying I understand them because I've reverse engineered his experiences and I can sort of understand how he got there. Everyone can understand, if you can understand how serial killers become who they are, you understand how people get how they are and what their story is. I think I think that's part of the problem, is part of the reason why you don't do this. And part of the reason why people don't bother is because you do start to see yourself and your own story and your own pain in people that you're trying to, in demonizing, and you make yourself feel better by sort of, attacking someone who's got more money than you or, but really at the end of the day, I think, it's weird to think that I would say, well, I see my story in Kanye West's story, but I do. Because I made decisions that weren't dissimilar and I didn't have $1 billion and fucking all of this scrutiny either. And I didn't have an ex-wife that was, I didn't have I had a degree of that, which was, an ex that had more resources, more social sort of connections, had family, and also, because of the broken nature of my family. I mean, one of the reasons why I don't like putting myself out there online is because I don't know which fucker's going to come out and say whatever the fuck they want to say about me that's not true. And I have to deal with that shit, that's a real thing, having to deal with that. People who will just say whatever to destroy you because they've just decided that, anyway, I've made my peace with that stuff. But I'm just saying there's a power imbalance there. There's a narrative imbalance. And also, again, I'm not saying that's for the courts to decide, okay? Not for you to decide. But what I'm saying is with Parler, this deal, it seems exploitative. It feels like somebody who saw him when he was vulnerable, involved herself in something that wasn't her business as a sort of, a means of showing sort of loyalty at the time. So when Kim Kardashian said that he was abusive, she basically said, no, Kanye's in the right here. He's just trying to protect his daughter, blah, blah, blah. And that was a whole public thing. But then also the red flags were there because there's been times where, if you look into the history of this, Candace Owens, praised Kanye for designing shirts or something that someone else did and tried to sort of leverage his name and use him in order to promote her own shit. Okay. And so, she's got a history and he fell out with her over that. And then they sort of, again, because there is that whole sort of bonding thing that goes on when you attach to, the attachments that you form. Again, this is going a little too deep and requires too much knowledge of him personally, but I'm saying generally, when you're in that state, I don't really have many of the friends that I made. I lost most of my friends during my divorce when my ex-husband rallied, and I made new friends that weren't so great. Okay. And I'm not friends with any of them. I've made a few, I've obviously made better friends since, like I'm more friends. I haven't really got lifelong friends. It's not really something that I've ever really had because I'm, moved around a lot and stuff like that. But one thing that you will do is when the world is going after you and when you are under attack, especially when it's your kids or when it's like someone that you loved and trusted and, like remember that, the dynamic of the Kardashian family is one that's quite tight-knit. If you've been in, I know those, mate. It's almost codependent. There's probably a codependency there. It's quite, if you watch the show, it's quite unhealthy. Even to an outside observer, it doesn't look like a healthy fucking relationship, right? But to be cast out of that and then suddenly see them, that tight-knit unit sort of turn on you, that's something that that anyone who's been on the other side of a family court with a well-resourced, tight-knit family of gossips and people who will do anything for the drama and the spectacle, they'll fall into line. You recognise that experience. But what you will do is if that's happening, you will latch on to whoever is showing you a bit of like support and love, right? You will latch on to anyone. And I feel that there's, again, this is just from the outside and just patterns of behaviour. And the fact that she sort of tried her luck in the past and then they've mended that wound, he feels this sort of sense of loyalty to her. Her worldview is fucking revolting. And at some point he's just kind of gone through these various experiences that, have led to this sort of broken heuristic in his mind that's like, this cabal of, George Soros. He's watching all this stuff with George Floyd and the BLM and internalizing all this George Soros shit. All this stuff he sees like with capitalism, but because he's a billionaire, he's broken. His brain is broken. He's seeing it because he made it and he made a lot of money and he saw that you can actually make it. There's a conflict there, which is that, well, capitalism was good to him, so he needs to find something else. But it's like, okay, it's actually very interesting. And it's kind of interesting, exploration of how sort of fascism can fuck you and sort of flip based on sort of certain conditions. Like in Nazi Germany, they I've got to go. In Nazi Germany, it was very much people just would, they'd receive this propaganda, but there was this perception that the Jews were rich and had, all this sort of more control and that, so then, that confirmation bias, that availability heuristic sort of just fits in. You go, oh yeah, I see that and I see that and I see that and I see that. Oh yeah, that's my worldview. So then they create this sort of bubble where everything you see is LGBT takeover on libs of TikTok and everything you see is Antifa and everything is white kids with Antifa and everything you see is like, Robin DiAngelo, and you see all these sort of, woke Twitter going fucking ballistic over this stuff, and you're going to be broken in the brain. And then you've got someone like Candace Owens, who's, I think is a fucking manipulator and a snake, but, allegedly. Don't know her either. I'm just saying. Who looks like she has managed to see an opportunity and to make some money for herself and get some clout for herself by collaborating and using this man. Again, I don't know whether it's a genuine friendship or not, but, again, everyone's got their own story. I'm just focused on one. I'm sure she's got hers. Okay, there's obviously some deep, dark fuckery going on there for her to say what she says. Okay. But anyway, I've got to go, but hopefully this sort of gave you some food for thought. I know I was a bit meandering and stuff, but try to ease up on this stuff. Like don't forget that people with bipolar, assuming he's got bipolar, but let's just assume he's not okay, He's got some form of, even if it's just grief, okay? And grief that's beyond sort of, average stages of grief, okay? He's not mentally well. And people with mental illness are more likely to be victims of abuse than perpetrators, first of all. And, anywhere between 2 times more likely and 100 times more likely, depending on whether, they're on drugs and, drugs and alcohol and the dynamics and, the money situation, all those sorts of things. I would imagine that Kanye West is quite vulnerable to financial abuse and this type of scam, which is why I thought this looks like this looks like abuse to me, and I hope that the lawyers and his business managers have somewhat got these things documented so that they can, when it comes out in court, that this woman goes down for it. I hope she, again, he might be in his right mind and it might be a media hit piece. Many things can be true at once. Okay. And this is the thing about sort of, latching on to one truth, is that you miss large parts of what's interesting, which is the story. Anyway, I hope I didn't, I'll get back into streaming a bit more regularly and a bit more sort of I got to run. Today was sort of off the cuff, but consider becoming a patron. If you can become a patron, I'd also like to thank Matt for becoming a big patron, not the $1 million one, but a very generous one. And I appreciate that very much. And it makes it worthwhile. But if you can become a patron, it would be very beneficial to me, or at least share and help me out because, or engage in stuff, because it's tough going. It's pay to play. And there's no organic stuff. I'm just talking, mostly shouting into the void. Those who do find me tend to support me and tend to like it. And, you get your odd stragglers of dickheads and Lindsay bros and stuff. But for the most part, I like what we've got here. So I will be back on Monday, probably. I'm trying to ease up into sort of 3 times a week. The 3 times a week, I'm going to make it 2 times a week public and 1 patron only at some point, only because at some point you need to have some sort of value add, whatever. But I'll watch this space. I'll just, I'm easing back into it all. So I'm still working on my branding, and I've been actually sitting down and knuckling down with After Effects and doing some proper screens and all that stuff. So, but I'll get there in the end. I love you. I've got to go. Thank you for your precious life seconds. And just try to think beyond, like I said, think beyond the lizard brain. Just try to understand who he was as a person. Try to understand where people are coming from. Everyone's got a story, even if they don't bleed it out and vomit it all over everybody. Everyone's got stories and pain. Okay? And in fact, those that are bleeding all over everybody and vomiting all over everybody are the ones that are, probably the ones, that have the least going on up here. Okay. Anyway, I got to go. I love you. Take care. Bye.